it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel, broadcasting live from Studio Z.
Makes me act the way I do.
This is Undead Live Evening Edition, reporting from the front lines of the zombie apocalypse. We have your back morning, noon, and night, whether you're dead, undead, recently deceased, or fully alive. Today is Thursday, October 15th. I'm Athena Actipus.
And I'm Dave Lundberg-Henrik, and this evening we will take a deep dive into the current pandemic, exploring the evolutionary success story behind the virus, looking at the economic consequences, and exploring potential containment strategies.
Yeah, but first...
That's right.
Yeah,
we have
I know
Steve
and Larry back.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So let's see. What are they going to be talking about? So
yeah, well, I think I just really am curious as to what they are seeing happening in their neck of the woods.
Oh, hold on. There's David Quammen. Hello, David. And Steve. All right.
Here I am. I am Steve. I don't have a snake around my arm.
So, Steve, it's so weird that we're, that we have this platform, because I really want to show you something. I was making a video for just for our little segment about my company, and I just want to share this with you and I guess with the audience, since this is our new. But dude, you gotta. Can we just, Dave? Do you?
Larry, I don't usually see you stumble over your words. What do you? Something's bugging you.
Maybe I just need you to give me a reality check, but it kind of freaked me out. Let me just show you, and then we can get into it a little bit.
Okay, sure.
Schloss, I wanted to give you a virtual tour of my new storage space. I'm very excited. I've got all my work all in one place, packed away in boxes, soon to be critter food out here in the country. But it's nice to have it all in one place. It's kind of like, Raiders of the Lost Ark here, or Citizen Kane, with all this stuff just like, whoa, what the fuck? Did you see that? Hold on. Jesus, what the fuck? But you did see it, right?
Well, what kind of reaction is that? Did you even watch it?
Yeah, I watched it. There's a kid with green makeup outside a window.
Well, maybe that's true, but look, I'm all alone out here, I have been for what seems like since COVID started, and I was just doing my little thing for you, and then what the hell? And then when I ran out, there was no one there. So it is on video.
Yeah, no, I saw it. I'm glad you caught it on video.
Okay.
And I'm sorry I came on so harsh there. I just don't want us to jump to conclusions. It looked like kind of a green tinted face out the window. I fully expected you to go outside and have it be your kid or something wearing makeup and saying, ha ha ha.
My kid isn't around. That's the point. There's no one around. I haven't seen anyone. I've been isolating and doing my thing, and we've got our show, and that's like all I live for. And then who is this guy? And then, when I ran around, there was no one there. So
nothing.
I'm saying it's a zombie because he would have been very fast.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on, man, but it's just, when you're putting out, you got the dead deer and all this shit going on. I'm getting a little, I don't know. It just feels like a weird.
It does seem strange. I thought we'd be talking about movies, but it's just making me think about something. So Listen, you got to tell me I'm not losing my mind, okay? I did see that thing in the window. What's bugging me right now is that earlier today I tried to get rid of that carcass. I was going to take it to the town dump. I threw it in the back of the car. That really, honest to God, is the last thing I remember. I found myself back in my driveway. Time had passed, and I know this sounds completely nutty. Time had passed. I had some blood on me, not much. walked back inside. My wife looked at me kind of quizzically. I didn't remember much. I had one of those gluten-free beers that I am forced to enjoy since I can't have gluten. Yeah, you get to drink the gluten. Thank you for throwing that in my face, Pheasant. But I don't know, I'm bothered by it. So that with the deer carcass and now that thing outside the window, like it is totally in your wheelhouse to pull a stunt like that, to have a kid dress up in makeup. So are you sure you're not screwing with me? Because this is like the kind of thing you do.
No. That part I'm not doing. Because look, we have this forum now. I kind of feel like we're past pulling stunts and stuff. I think we have an obligation to our viewers.
That's true.
To be truthful. I mean, I know that obligation is not held.
No, but you're not going to make
broadcaster.
No, but you're exactly right. But you're not in the business of creating fake news. So you capture something on video. We don't know what it is.
Fake movies, but
right.
Right.
No, this is different though. So we should be analytic about it. So it could be a kid in town who's playing a trick on you. No one's in town, but you live in. I mean, there's someone around, right?
Yeah, it was just weird. And when we've been talking about like these little encroachments, and then you're talking about your Boston thing. The Boston thing. I'm just
the dead deer, that Boston thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but then you made the leap that the dead deer, and so it's whatever your paranoia is. But still, I'm just saying, yeah, things are a little unsettled over in my side of town. I'm over here in upstate New York, so
yeah. I don't know. With their footprint, I mean, I would want you to go out and like just check out. Well, first, you know what? You're my friend. Are you safe there? Like, are you worried?
I mean, I just got a little paranoid. Like, who the hell is on the property? This is a very remote area that I'm in, and it's volatile political time, and there's COVID, and now we're talking about these weird incidents in the Midwest, and then you're talking about stuff going on about, I don't know, it just psychologically, maybe I need your counsel as a
shrink. Yeah, put on my other hat, my actual job.
Maybe we should go offline. We don't need to involve these these wonderful viewers who are here for serious matters. But I don't know. Anyway, that's what happened to me today.
Look, man, we'll come back to this. Stay safe, though. Okay, we'll figure it out.
As for that blackout, what the hell, man? What happened? I don't know.
No clue. I'm gonna call my doctor first thing tomorrow morning because I actually don't know what it is, nor do I know where this blood came from.
I don't even have a doctor.
Yeah. I'll call you.
Get on the more serious things, but
yeah. Thanks for looking out for me.
Out there.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Steve and Larry, so much for sharing all that with us. Steve, hope that you're all right. That blackout was not anything serious that we need to worry about. And Larry, I'm glad that you're okay too. And I hope that things stay stable.
I mean, you saw the guy, right? There was something outside the window, whatever.
It's definitely looking weirder and creepier, but I still think at this point, stay calm. It seems like you guys, I don't know. I mean, unless there's something happening across the whole Northeast, I think, I think just relax and just don't worry about it yet. Also, I just want to mention your garage looks really nice. So
that's where you go. The garage.
Yeah.
That's my life's work in there.
Yeah.
So, but I think for now, again, I just don't think you guys don't want to overreact too much. So
you're trying to de-escalate the.
Yeah. I think I still think everything's fine. I think it's probably just a couple of weird things,
that happened to happen in very close proximity. But yeah, you're right.
I mean,
we'll keep an eye on things. We'll keep an eye on things. Steve, Larry, thank you so much. We hope we'll have you back again soon.
I hope so too.
We'll talk about movies next time. I know.
Yeah. Promise.
Yeah. I come on. I think stay focused on the movies, because that's really what we like.
Yeah,
so
we'll try.
There's always something weird going on. I don't know that means you guys are in imminent danger. That's my take. So
all right.
So reassuring. Goodbye.
I mean, also the nice thing is we're in the Southwest, so chances are.
Oh,
I didn't realize you guys were
so selfless too.
I thought we were going to take you guys off the air before I said that. that.
Yeah.
Just ignore that.
Okay,
So-
okay,
Well,
fine.
thanks so much.
Blue
Be
state,
safe.
so what does it matter what happens to us? I get it. I understand.
Yeah, that's okay. It's
All
okay.
right.
All right.
Well, it was great to see you guys. So
Talk later. Bye
See ya.
bye.
Bye.
So next up this evening, we have author and evolutionary biologist David Quammen. You might have seen him earlier with the snake wrapped around his neck. Well, he is joining us now to talk to us about the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Welcome to Undead Live, David.
Thank you, Athena. Thanks, David. Athena, you do me too much justice. I am not an evolutionary biologist. I just play one on TV frequently.
In my eyes, you are an evolutionary
I'm
biologist.
coming to you from my office here in Bozeman, Montana, and it's Boots and I.
Whoa.
Boots is the only family member that is allowed to share the office with me all day because he's very quiet and gentle, but he's out right now. Can you say hello, Boots? Good boy. Good boy. Whoa. Okay, it's all right. Anyway, so I happened to read on the Channel Z website today your official definition of a zombie, an entity fully or partially under control of another entity. And that's not Boots, by the way. Boots has full agency. He is not under my control. He's going to climb around wherever he wants to on my desk. He does that frequently, but maybe he'll stay with me for a little while. But an entity fully or partially under control of another entity, perfect segue to talk about viruses in cells. Because what is an infected cell with a virus in it but an entity under control of another entity? An entity that has had its translation machinery hijacked so that the virus can make more copies of itself.
David, could you adjust your camera so we can see your face?
Oh.
As much as we love seeing Boots.
Okay, there we go.
Wonderful.
All right. Boots, do you want to climb onto the desk? So a cell that's infected by a virus under control of another entity. A dog, a rabid dog, infected with the rabies virus, under control of another entity. Why does a rabid dog seek to bite humans or anything else it comes across? Because the virus has infected it, traveled up its neural system to its brain, and started to manufacture more viral copies, and sent many of those virions to the salivary glands. And then under control of this virus, the dog seeks to bite an unsuspecting victim so that the virus can be transmitted to the next host. So I'm going to talk about viruses and that sort of hijack relationship. The host, all viruses, of course, have to infect a cell of some sort of a cellular creature in order to replicate themselves. That cellular creature, if it's an animal, it's a multicellular creature, could be plant. We call that reservoir host, the place where a virus might live relatively benignly, relatively inconspicuously over long periods of time in this reservoir host.
So, David, a reservoir host is a host that's not really that affected by the virus. Is that right?
Right. A reservoir host is a host in which the virus lives over the long term, inconspicuously, without causing much, if any, overt disease. It is a place of security, as opposed to a place of opportunity. And I'm going to talk about the balance between security and opportunity. But I want you to imagine with me two viruses, two hypothetical viruses. This is the way we'll go into this. The first one, I'm going to call this virus A, not very interesting name. Let's say that it lives in Africa, somewhere in a reservoir host in Africa. It's a coronavirus. So it is a single-stranded RNA virus, as all coronaviruses are. meaning that when it replicates itself, it makes a lot of mistakes in the genome. And for that reason and others, it has a high capacity to evolve relatively quickly. Not as fast as the influenzas, but faster than most other viruses. So this is a coronavirus, calling it virus A, and it's living in a reservoir host in Africa. Maybe it's in a bat, maybe it's in a monkey, maybe it's in a chimpanzee. I'm choosing mammals for a particular reason. It's living there, low population density, low viremia in this low concentration in the bloodstream of this creature, low profile, high security over a long period of time. Maybe it's got a 1,000,000-year-old relationship with this particular host. So there it is. And that is security. Okay. And then along comes some sort of disruption. Disruption, let's say, by a human who is cutting down a forest or hunting for animals for food. And this human disrupts this reservoir host and dislodges this virus. The virus doesn't seek out a new host. A virus just gets jostled into a new host. But when it finds itself in a new kind of host, that is an opportunity. That's a new sort of challenge. It's a new habitat. It's almost as though a gaggle of rats have jumped off a boat that comes crunching up against an oceanic island, and the rats jump off, 20 rats jump off of this boat onto a pristine oceanic island. And then the rats face a challenge, which is also an opportunity. There are no rats on this island. There are no mammals on this island. There are no predators on this island. There are just a bunch of innocent, ecologically naive creatures, reptiles and birds, say a lot of ground nesting birds that could afford to nest on the ground because there are no predators on the ground. So the bats now, either they die out, these 20 bats, because they can't make a living on this island, or they find a way to make a living on this island and they persist and maybe they thrive. So these rats, did I say bats? I mean rats. These rats that have jumped off discover these ground nesting birds. Great. So they eat up all the eggs of these ground nesting birds, and the rails and the dodo and the dodderels, whatever ground nesting birds are on this island, they disappear. They go extinct. Now the rats are hungry. Time passes, and slowly they learn to prey on lizards that they dig out of holes in the ground, cracks in the rock walls. And maybe over a longer period of time, they evolve, these rats, so they have better claws, they have better digging capacity, and they live off of these lizards. And maybe some of them even start to climb trees, and they become so adept, or they evolve to be so adept at tree climbing that now they can eat eggs of birds that nest in trees. The rats are thriving. The rats are everywhere. At this point, you may as well call this Rat Island. That is an evolutionary success story for a little population of rats, okay? What have the rats done? They have obeyed the three big Darwinian imperatives, what I think of as the three basic Darwinian imperatives. Multiply yourself in number, extend yourself in geographical space, and extend yourself in time. Persist over time. Any creature that is driven by a genome obeys those three Darwinian imperatives. Well, remember, viruses, whether you consider them alive or not, are driven by genomes. They are creatures that replicate, that have genomes. So they too are subject to the Darwinian imperatives, the three Darwinian imperatives. Multiply yourself in abundance, extend yourself in geographical space, and expand yourself throughout time. So that's what viruses do. Okay. So what was I talking about? I was talking about this first hypothetical virus, virus A. So it has done all these things. It has been disrupted by a human. It has gotten into the human. It adapts to the human. It discovers that it can replicate abundantly in the human, maybe right away, and maybe it can transmit from human to human, not too well, but a little bit. And then over time, with slow transmission, it evolves by natural selection. It adapts better and better to transmitting from one human to another. Okay. All right. Let's give this virus a name now. Let's call it HIV-1 group M. Let's make its reservoir host a chimpanzee in the southeastern corner of Cameroon, back around the beginning. Boots, don't go away. The beginning of the 20th century. This virus in the chimpanzee, now we would call that SIV, Simeon Immunodeficiency Virus, subset chimp, SIV chimp. It gets into humans. It transmits slowly from one human to another in the southeastern corner of Cameroon, villages along the river. Finally, it gets to the big cities of the Congo, Leopoldville and Brazzaville. It gets into more and more people. It has more opportunity to evolve. It becomes very good at transmitting, at least sexually, from human to human. And it causes the AIDS pandemic. HIV-1 group M, that is the pandemic strain that has affected more than 70 million people and killed almost 35 million of them. It has become a very successful virus. It was in a chimpanzee population. Chimpanzees, alas, are declining. It was on a sinking ship. It got into this other host, humans. Humans are in the ascendance. Suddenly it's on this luxury liner. It travels around the world. It's a very successful virus. So quickly, virus number 2, hypothetical virus number 2. This virus is also a coronavirus. I'm going to give this virus a more interesting name. I'm going to call it Hill's coronavirus. Hill's coronavirus, the possessive. And the reason is that it lives in a real creature. Its reservoir host is a real creature called Hill's horseshoe bat. Hill's horseshoe bat, which is a very rare endangered species of bat found only in Rwanda. And in fact, it's only been seen 2 or 3 times over the last 40 years. Very, very rare endangered species of bat. It's dying off because of habitat destruction. Its habitat is being destroyed. The tropical forests, the Central African forests surrounding certain caves have been cut down, burned, peeled away, and this bat is now endangered. So there's this horseshoe, Hill's horseshoe coronavirus living in this bat. Okay, the virus is hypothetical, the bat is real. One more hypothetical. A farmer comes along. A farmer comes along and he wants some fertilizer for his little patch of crops on this, this very poor, formerly rainforest soil. And he goes to a bat cave and he digs up a sack of bat guano, shovels it up, puts it in this gunny sack, and carries it back to his garden. This poor farmer dumps it on the garden. Dust, bat guano dust. The bat guano dust is carrying Hill's coronavirus. This man becomes infected. Okay. He gets respiratory symptoms. He goes back to his village. His brother is visiting. He infects one member of his immediate family, one of his daughters, and he also infects his brother. His brother is a nurse at a regional clinic. His brother goes back to the regional clinic, and there's a visiting doctor, and he infects her through the respiratory route. Nobody knows what this is. There are lots of respiratory infections in Central Africa. This is not a rare thing. They have fevers, but fevers are very common. The doctor who gets infected, she goes back to Kigali, the capital city. The virus passes from one person to another. Pretty soon, that virus is on an airplane out of the Kigali airport, headed for Doha, headed for Kinshasa, headed for London. And that virus discovers ways to replicate well in humans and quickly adapts to transmitting well from human to human. Hill's coronavirus spreads around the world in a matter of months, becoming a very, very successful virus. A virus that was this close to extinction because its reservoir host was going to go extinct, now is living in humans, 8 billion of us around the world, this dominant species. And so this is now one of the world's more successful viruses. And I'm going to give it a new name now. Instead of Hill's coronavirus, I'm going to call it SARS-CoV-3. Okay. Mm-hmm. So obviously in between the bookends, there's another virus, and we can talk about that now.
Yeah. So David, thank you for a really amazing set of partially fictional, partially factual stories. First of all, can you tell us just a little bit more about which pieces of this story are fact and which ones are fiction?
Sure.
that
Yeah,
you've
and that's
either-
important. That's important to maintain that distinction. Hill's horseshoe bat is a real bat. It lives in Rwanda. It is very endangered. That is all true. Are there coronaviruses in it? Probably, because coronaviruses are very diverse and they have their main reservoir hosts in bats. There are thousands of coronaviruses living in bats. The estimates I've seen range from 3,000 to 15,000 undiscovered coronaviruses living in bats, many of which could infect humans. But this one is hypothetical. The dynamics, Darwin's imperatives, the three imperatives, those are real. The fact that viruses evolve, viruses obey those imperatives, that is true.
Yeah. And one other thing that I think is really unique about the perspective that you're kind of inviting us into is this idea of sort of thinking about something as, deadly as a virus that can cause a pandemic, but thinking from the perspective of the virus, how does what we see in terms of the way that a pandemic is manifesting, how does that manifestation actually serve the evolutionary interests of the virus itself?
That's right. That's right. And that's important to remember. Viruses have no malice toward us. They have no purposes. They have no intentions. They don't go out looking for ways to jump from one host to another. The title of my book, Spillover, it's spillover rather than jump over, because viruses are passive in terms of moving from one host to another. But once they get into a new host, it's an opportunity, and they are capable of seizing that opportunity. They're required to, if they're going to survive, to seize that opportunity.
So why doesn't every disease, every virus jump from host to host? Like, because you'd mentioned that there were all these other viruses living in bats that could infect us.
Yeah.
Like,
opportunity. Yeah. Opportunity. They have not yet had the opportunity. Or in some cases, they may have had the opportunity, but they have been, imagine those 20 rats that jumped ashore on that island. Imagine if they ate up all the eggs of the ground nesting birds, and then there were no lizards on that island. Those 20 bats might have starved. So that would have been an unsuccessful colonization. And so if a virus is shaken loose from its reservoir host and it gets into humans and it can't replicate, or it replicates in one human but can't get transmitted to the next human, then that virus comes to a dead end. That's called a dead end infection. And we don't know how many times this has happened and is happening right now. But so it's essentially, it's an unplumbed reality that viruses are constantly getting opportunities, and some few of them are successful, unfortunately for us, and probably in many cases they're not successful.
Well, and David, how do the changes that are happening in terms of ecosystems and conservation issues and environmental shifts, how is that affecting the chances for those spillover events and those opportunities for viruses to colonize new hosts?
There is a big difference in scale. The difference between now and 200,000 years ago, when we humans had just become a species, and we were hunter-gatherers, and we were killing wild animals to eat them, and we were becoming exposed to their viruses. The difference between then and now is scale. There is much more disruption of wild animals, much more exposure to viruses, many more humans, 8 billion now, and we are much more interconnected. So Boots, where are you going? So if a virus spilled over 200,000 years ago from a monkey that was killed by someone who belonged to a small band of hunter-gatherer humans, 50 people in that group, and that human became infected with a monkey virus, and it killed him, and then it transmitted to 29 other people in that group of 50, and it killed all of them. 20 people would be left, but those 20 people would be living at a great distance from any other groups, at an intentional distance, probably staying away from other groups. maybe laying down territories and defending them by warfare, or not. And the virus wouldn't transmit. So it's been happening forever, but now there are 8 billion of us. We're causing much more ecological disruption than ever before. We're giving viruses much more opportunity both to spill into us and then to spread from one to another.
Yeah. Dude, Pam is pointing out that there may be a link here also with sort of economic pursuits, like the jump of the Knowlesi virus from macaques to humans. Is that something that you think had to do with these kinds of forces?
Plasmodium knowlesii. That's a malarial parasite, not a virus. And that, if we open that can of worms, that'll take us in some other directions. I mean, it's a pathogen. It's a zoonotic pathogen. It's the only one of the 5 known types of malarial parasite that can infect humans. It's the only known one that is still a zoonotic pathogen, that it passes back and forth between, as Pam says, between macaques and humans, mostly on the island of Borneo.
So you sort of mentioned going back to this idea. So when it jumps from humans, if it just kills the human right away and they can't spread it, then it's not successful, basically. Or if the human's immune system just shuts it down and they can't spread it, it's not successful. But if it hits, it's got to basically hit that sort of perfect balance. Is that right?
Right. And it's a reminder of the rule that, parasites do not want to kill their hosts in a hurry. Some people say and viruses are parasites, of course. Some people say that they think that there's this adage: the first law of a successful parasite is don't kill your host. No, the first law of a successful parasite is don't kill your host until you've had a chance to disperse to another individual of that host population. So you can kill your host, but don't kill your host in such a hurry that you have no chance to spread. It's one of the reasons why SARS-CoV-2 is so much more dangerous than Ebola. Ebola is a very gruesome Ebola virus, Zaire, the one of the 5 Ebola viruses that is most infamous for causing human outbreaks. Case fatality rate of around 60%, spreads only by bodily fluids, does not spread, as far as we know, on the respiratory route. So it makes people real sick real fast, and in some cases causes gruesome deaths. But it's not a broadly successful virus because it is too virulent and not adept enough at transmission.
So now there's a new virus on the scene, right? Do you want to tell us about that?
So now we have this virus, SARS-CoV-2. And let me just bounce backward briefly with the evolutionary scenario. Imagine a population of coronaviruses in horseshoe bats in southern China, right? Okay. And this population is ancestral to the virus that is now in humans, SARS-CoV-2. And that virus, call that virus Z for zombie. It's an unknown coronavirus in bats. And it splits into 2 populations because the 2 populations of bats split. And each subpopulation of bats, they become isolated from each other and they each carry a dose of this virus. And then 40 years or 50 years passes and they evolve gradually, almost randomly. They don't need to be adapting to different circumstances, but genetic drift, an evolutionary principle, causes them to become different from one another. And maybe they adapt to some different things. So after 50 years, then people come along and they sample one population of the virus, population A, and they find a virus in there and they give it the name rat G13. Now that sounds technical, but remember it. And then about 7 years later, the other population of bats spill their virus into humans, and it gets to the city of Wuhan, and it causes a pandemic. And people sequence that virus, and they compare it to rat G13 that they found 7 years earlier, and they see these 2 viruses now are 96% similar by their genomes. And that's what we have. That's all we know about the origins of this virus. We have population A, we have rat G13, and it is 96% similar to the human coronavirus. But we don't have population B with the immediate ancestor of this coronavirus. But scientists are looking for it, and they need to find it. Is it in the bat population? Has it spilled over into a population of pangolins and adapted to that? We don't know. It's one of the big questions. And until we find that, we haven't found the origin virus of SARS-CoV-2.
David, thanks. Can I ask you a bigger picture question now? So if we are looking at the pandemic from the perspective of the virus, what behaviors of humans are most in the virus's interests? You know, what do viruses, quote, want us to be doing? And, you know, when are we doing their bidding? What kinds of behaviors are really in the evolutionary advantage of the virus?
Well, again, we're speaking metaphorically. Viruses don't have wants. They don't have intentions. But if they did, they would want us to be hollering about our right not to wear masks. They would want us to be hollering about our right not to vaccinate our kids. They would want us to be hollering about our right not to social distance. They would be hoping that we would holler for all the bars and restaurants to be opened as soon as possible. And they would want us to elect ignorant, arrogant national leaders who dismissed science. All of that would serve their purposes.
Well, David, I'm glad that some of what you're talking about is fiction, because I can't imagine how bad an apocalypse like that would be. You know, I mean, we've got zombies now, but that just sounds horrendous.
Yeah. It would. It's almost. He's being shy. He doesn't want to say hello again. It's almost. Yeah. It's almost too horrific to believe. I agree with you, Athena. Absolutely. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, David, go ahead, Dave.
Oh no. So and then so there's still another sort of in between SARS out there that we know is out there somewhere, but we haven't been exposed to. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
The immediate ancestor of this, virus, the one that's not 96% similar to us, to this COVID-19 virus, not 96% similar, but 100% or 99.9% similar. That virus has not been found yet. Does it live in bats? Where? In Yunnan province or in some other province in Guangdong? Does it possibly live in palm civets? Does it possibly live in pangolins? Does it live in both bats and pangolins? We don't know.
Wow.
Something to look forward to, I guess. So
finding some answers. Yeah. Well, David, thank you for this truly unique perspective on SARS-CoV, the current pandemic, and all the potential other aspects of pandemics that we don't even realize we're at risk of at the moment.
Yes. Yeah. Think about at least 3,000 more coronaviruses out there just in bats.
So one last quick question. I know we need to jump on, but Erica O'Neill just said, what steps can we take to lower the risk of zoonotic transmission in the future? So
control how many children you have and control how much you consume. Human population multiplied by human consumption represent the footprint that we make upon the natural world, drawing resources toward us. And as we draw resources toward us, including the resources that are necessary to make everybody's cell phone, which come from mines in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. All of those decisions that we make, how much we eat, how many children we have if we have children, how much we travel, those go straight to our footprint upon the natural world and bring viruses closer to us.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks.
Next, we'll be hearing from Esma Gel about the state of the pandemic in Arizona. Esma, welcome to the show.
Hi, so nice to be here. It's kind of unfortunate that we have to meet in this situation, you know, the apocalypse and everything. My guess for 2020 was really Yellowstone erupting, not an apocalypse, but 2020, never fails to deliver. So yeah, I'm not that surprised.
No, Esma, you actually have been involved in the modeling of the pandemic since the COVID pandemic began. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, especially in those very early stages?
Thank you so much. So since about January, we were watching things, like from the news, the internet, so on and so forth. And when things got a little bit more serious here about like mid-March or so, I contacted leadership at ASU. I'm a faculty member at ASU. And, asked, what can I do? So I'm an engineer. I'm an industrial engineer. We call, ourselves operations researchers. So I'm trained more in decision-making, logistics. So I've been working in logistics of patient access management, for example. So I was guessing maybe there's something I could do in those things. But quickly, I've realized that there's actually, some opportunities to do some modeling for projections, to estimate things like how many people are estimated to die, be in the hospital, so on and so forth. So I quickly started learning new techniques, and I went back to my graduate school days, coding sometimes 14 hours per day. But it seems like it's going to be useful because there's about another 3,000, viruses that might actually wreak havoc on our, lives. So I think it's not lost, effort. So since mid-March or beginning of April, I've been, developing models. Our group has public health people, epidemiologists, mathematicians, and other kinds of like policy people. So what we did is develop a model and kind of kept a very close eye in what's going on in Arizona.
And what do these models help with? What are the goals of making these models?
So the goal is mainly to figure out like what we expect to happen, like how many people do we expect in the hospitals, how many people do we expect to be in the ICU, to die, so on and so forth. And, like the data on confirmed cases is useful, but it's not really giving everybody the right understanding of what's going on. So these models are actually built to reflect the current state or status of an epidemic in a local area. So these are ordinary differential equation based models, very homogenized, compartmentalized models that we use regularly. And for Arizona, we built a little bit more specific model to estimate, okay, how many people do we expect in the hospital? How many people do we expect to be infected, so on and so forth. One specific thing with this COVID-19 virus is there's this thing called asymptomatic individuals. So what makes it hard, how this makes it hard to build these models is that there's a large number of people that you can't quite detect as infected. So there are estimates that the current number of infected, at any point in time, the number of infected people are about 10 times what you can detect in the system. So you have to factor in that kind of understanding into these models to see, okay, so if I'm infecting 2, there's probably another, 18 or so that are in the system, possibly infecting others, transmitting the disease. Some of them are asymptomatic, don't show any symptoms. Some of them are really sick, some of them are not, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of diversity in this that makes it hard.
Now, Esma, the models that you created, did those get used to help guide policy in our state?
Yes, so since almost the beginning, about April timeframe, I believe, we've been talking to state during a period we were kind of let go, which was actually kind of an event. So that email was leaked and we were in the media for quite a number of times.
Wait, so you were fired even though you weren't getting paid? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that happens, obviously, I guess, apparently. That was news to me too. But anyway, so we were called back later saying that they were concerned about the number of hours we were working. So
really,
we are called back.
It was just in your own best interest that they wanted you to stop working. It didn't have anything to do with your findings.
Well, we weren't, the interesting fact is we weren't even saying anything very draconian at the time. You know, Arizona wasn't really doing that bad. I mean, our models were actually surprisingly very accurate. And interestingly, at the beginning of the epidemic, we used different kinds of signals. You know, I tried to build models that actually looked at confirmed cases and kind of find ways to inflate them appropriately, not too much, but just sufficiently to initialize the model and simulate these models. These models are actually not that hard to analyze. I mean, you can't really analytically solve these ODE models, but you can simulate them. And for a given initialization, they give you a single solution. So they are very average. So they're not really interesting analytically, but it's hard to build them, initialize them, so on and so, or build them with parameters, I mean, and initialize them. Later on in the epidemic, we were able to use other kinds of data sources, such as deaths, and hospitalization numbers became available. So we got access to public data on hospitalizations and things like that. And I started using, developing methods basically to inflate the number of deaths. For every one person who dies, there's probably about 150 people who were exposed during this time frame. So what if I actually push them through this model? So I devised methods like that. So David's talk was very interesting. Everybody has their own way of understanding the world around them, and math was my way. It really kept me sane.
So do you know where we stand now, essentially?
So where we stand now in Arizona, I can talk about Arizona. There's a ton of different models nationwide, so on and so forth. What I've seen is that because we were so focused in Arizona, we were able to catch the behavior very closely and carefully, and that's why our models were very, very accurate. So the last model I actually fit for Arizona was dated July 23rd. So you know that prior to that point, we had a period of increase in May and June and beginning of July. Things were actually very, very bad in Arizona. At the end of June, you know, toward the beginning of July, I believe, we had a mask ordinance. We had a set of mask ordinances. And what happened is that we basically related these kinds of events to when or how we fitted the model. So I basically looked at, okay, when did, you know, for example, stay-at-home orders happened? When did mask ordinances happen? So on and so forth. And I fit different transmission rates to these different periods. So the interesting thing is, when we look at, mask ordinances, the period after mask ordinances, the transmission rates we were showing were quite a bit lower than the transmission rates I was fitting for earlier in the epidemic stay-at-home period. So it was interesting to see that masks really actually made a difference in the transmission rates in Arizona. And that was actually the last model I fitted on July 23rd with that data. So I lowered down the transmission rates. And since then, we were actually riding on that, that curve that consistently declined. However, unfortunately, this week I looked at the data again, and it seems like we are seeing an uptick in the hospitalizations and the death numbers, and I'm seeing a need to refit my models, and it's going to be probably increased transmission rate, unfortunately.
Yeah, Esma, we have some questions pouring in now, actually, from the audience. One of them is from Ilana Rain. She's asking, how do you talk with people who deny that there is even a pandemic going on, the deniers, if you will?
So this is very interesting because my next door neighbor, we had a conversation in May, and my next door neighbor was wearing a shirt that said "Screw Solar." Okay, so that actually tells you who I'm speaking to. So I mean, she said, "Oh, this is all a hoax. This is media," and I'm like, well, Nancy, I'm not watching any TV. I'm reading about 10 to 15 articles a week to build this model. I'm using math. It has nothing to do with the media. And it was very hard. And we had this conversation back and forth. And it's your neighbor. Finally, I said, you know what, Nancy, we're going to stay at home. You're welcome to go out and have whatever, dinner, restaurant. It's probably going to be better because we'll reach herd immunity quicker that way. Maybe I'll get out of the house quicker. I mean, if you look at this, system, optimal versus individual optimal, user optimal, I have no idea how to deal with them, Lana. It's been very hard. But it's math. it's very easy. People do not have good intuition about exponential growth, but it is what it is. Like exponential growth is a very mean thing actually to deal with. And
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, with this issue of sort of exponential growth being something that people are not so good at reasoning about. But with math and with these theoretical frameworks that you bring to the table, you kind of have these superpowers to wrap your brains around things that other people might not otherwise have the ability to do. We have a question from Liz here. She's pointing out that you must really be going through a lot to deal with this emotionally. Is math kind of your coping mechanism for that? And do you have other coping mechanisms in addition to math?
Exactly. It really was math for me. I had to understand, make sense of what was going on and all the data that was coming in. So, these models give you a chance to understand, put pieces together and, understand this big picture of what is going on. So, one of the things that we really need to teach people is better math. And Ilana said, how do you talk to people? And that's one thing that we really need to do a better job with. We need to teach people better math and science and really give them these ways of dealing with the realities of life and understanding life, because they really fall in, the wrong hands if we don't do that.
Thank you, Esma.
Yeah, no, this is great. So you love looking at the math, and now we have our next guest actually was just describing how she thinks it's really beautiful sort of watching these, like thinking about these sort of cells taking over cells. So this is Jessica Brinkworth. So she's going to come on and she's going to tell us all about how it zombifies our cells.
Yeah, it's true. And I've said this to Athena too, Dave, earlier this week, that I get, like, when I am reading descriptions of how immune cells interact with one another, I sometimes even get, it's going to sound ridiculous, I'll get like choked up. To me, it's there's just I know it sounds geeky, but there's just this beautiful sort of I don't know, the evolution of this system is like, it's so exquisite, and the way these cells interact is so interesting that during this pandemic, I've been able to bury myself completely in that, and so that's helped me cope with what's been going on. But I'm here to talk to you. I'm here from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign to talk to you about how this virus is such an elegant co-opter of cellular immunity. So that's, or meaning cell autonomous immunity. So immunity that each individual cell has on its own, and then more grandly, your immune system, because there are social factors that might also affect its success. And the combination of those two has been potentially leading to this grander pattern that we've been noting since March of 2020, which is, that sounds like ages ago, March of 2020, which is that there are clear disparities between who gets sick and how severely they get sick and who doesn't. So just to contextualize what I'm going to talk about really, really quickly. So SARS-CoV-2 is new. We have like 8 months of information on it. So much about what I'm going to talk about here is based on the group of viruses it belongs to, beta coronaviruses and positive stranded RNA viruses generally, which is the other larger group of viruses it belongs to. And information we have with from experiments based on the two most closely related viruses to it, SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV, which cause severe acute respiratory syndrome and Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, respectively. So to succeed in replication, SARS-CoV-2 has to bypass particular host defenses very well to enter host cells, spread, and replicate. And when we see disparities in COVID-19 progression from, say, asymptomatic to severe infections, we think part of what's influencing those disparities is how efficiently the virus is able to escape host immunity and replicate, because severe infection tends to be associated with having an awful lot of virus in the host.
Jessica, can I jump in for a minute? So
Please.
Tell us what happens, like what are the steps when, the virus sort of first makes contact with the human to actually a full-blown infection?
Right.
What happens in that process?
Okay, so I can talk about this at a a small level.
Yeah, just
yeah.
a big
So
picture.
so let's just say it's coming in through the nose. The very first thing that this virus, which is about 1.25 nanometers in diameter, has to do is get through the mucosa. So it has to get through the mucus and the mucous membrane. That's not too hard, actually. It turns out, and I know this because I've just read so much in the way of biomaterial research on this recently, but mucus has pores, and those pores are many times larger than this virus. So it's a smallish virus, and it passes through those pores, no problem. And then it lands close, hopefully, to an epithelial cell, which it's very, very good at infecting. So on this little chart that I have right here.
Now, when you said hopefully, you were speaking from the virus's perspective.
From the virus's perspective, right? Which again, like, not to anthropomorphize viruses, but if to be reproductively successful, it has to come to a cell bearing a particular type of receptor. So it has to get through that mucosal membrane, and then it has to bind to an epithelial cell in this scenario, and then it's got to shoot its genome into the cytoplasm, and then it has to make, once in there, it has to make replicative machinery and set up an assembly line for virion assembly and release. And it has to bypass a myriad of antiviral mechanisms that are intrinsic to the cell to do that first. And then on release, it has to be able to bypass all these things that cells nearby might be doing. So so I have here a little picture of what it does. This is a host cell here in blue. Here is my wonky drawing of a coronavirus. And the coronavirus binds to at least one receptor we know of right now, which is ACE2. And I'm saying that because I'm going to come back to that in a couple of minutes about why that's important. So it binds to the receptor, which allows the membrane of the virus to bind to the envelope of the virus to bind to the membrane of the cell, and then it can shoot its genome in. It's an RNA genome, which is an immune stimulant for the cell. The cell, almost all of your cells, have a ton of receptors inside of them and enzymes that can detect that RNA and any subsequent genomic products that might be produced in the interests of making the virions. So one of the things that this virus does right off the bat is that it caps that RNA. It literally puts these little molecular caps on it, so it looks like host RNA. And so it like puts a hat on and disguises itself. And that's true of its products that it makes as well. It then does this thing where it shoots, it starts to make a gene product that shuts down anti-RNA enzyme production in the cell. So it shuts down these RNases. And that keeps these enzymes that float around in here from eating up the genome and from eating up any genomic byproducts. Then what it does is that it starts to make replicative machinery, and almost all of it is based in this tubule system for protein synthesis inside of the host cell called the endoplasmic reticulum. It makes these little outpouchings. They're like double membrane vesicles is what they're called. And that's where assembly takes place. And while it's doing that, it's making enzymes of its own to clean up after itself. So not all parts end up in a virion, and those can also be immune stimulants. And so by doing this, it's avoiding these receptors that are in the cytoplasm and are also in these other cellular compartments. And then the virus,
like making a little pocket where it's doing its dirty business.
Yeah, exactly. It makes a little pocket where it's doing its dirty business. And then what it does is the envelope is made from the cell, the host endoplasmic reticulum to begin with. And this makes it really easy then for it to shuttle out. It's released by exocytosis, meaning that it buds and then it's sort of released out here. And it forces also a really weird cell program where the host cell ends up making these really long projections called phylopods. And then the virions can kind of just roll off these and roll over to the next cell. So that's what it does. This allows it to do two things. By avoiding detection, it can avoid the stimulation of what's called type 1 interferon responses. So hosts make a whole bunch of proteins called type 1 interferons, and they're triggered by detection of virus. They're very strong, potent antiviral proteins in and of themselves, but they also do a whole bunch of other stuff. So one of the things that the triggering of type 1 interferons does is that it increases receptor expression on the inside of the cell. So now you have more eyes to see virus coming in the first place. It will also then attack directly, these proteins directly attack these organelles and take them out. So it reduces the number of little tiny pockets where they can do their dirty business, and therefore reduces the number of potential variants. And then they also initiate what's called a recycling program. I don't know if you know this, but all of your cells have recycling programs inside of them for taking old, nasty old organelles and components and sort of saving what you want and chucking the rest. And this is also an antimicrobial program called autophagy. So it'll initiate that to get rid of virions that are on the inside. But one of the big important things that it does is that it expresses these type 1 interferons extracellularly as well. And that alerts nearby cells to set up antiviral programs and get them running. So it activates cells nearby, get rid of these things. There's something really bad here. And it alerts other cells to the problem, including T and B cells. So it initiates killer T, helper T, and antibody responses to the virus.
So it's kind of like an alarm call. It sort of puts out an alarm call.
Right. Now we think, and there's information that these kinds of viruses are good at suppressing this, but under social stress, which was one of the things that I wanted to talk about here, all of these conditions change. And one of the patterns that we've noticed in COVID-19 is that there are clear disparities of who's affected and who's not. So in the US, for example, non-Hispanic, Blacks, and Latino people are twice as likely to acquire COVID-19 and twice as likely to die. And if you control for age, those numbers change dramatically to 4.5 and 3.5 times as likely. And so there's this big disparity, and it reiterates this pattern that's observed worldwide and has been observed for decades for multiple causes of severe infection. And that's regardless of host ancestry and regardless of the causative pathogen, colonized and marginalized people are infected more often and die more often. This is a unifying feature of colonial nations like the United States and Canada and Australia, New Zealand, and I could list many more, the UK, many, many more. And so this pattern of infectious disease burden, it maps actually really well to discriminatory and segregationist practices and policies. And that's because they increase infectious disease risk by limiting resources of colonized people. This happens through restrictions in income and education and housing, and this contributes to all kinds of infectious risk factors, including poverty, crowding, and nutrition. But it also contributes to social stress. And so as a major source of chronic stress, received and perceived racism that accompanies all of this has been shown to reprogram cellular immune activities, and it triggers what's referred to as a conserved transcriptional response to adversity. And this is a pattern of gene expression that suppresses type 1 interferon responses, and therefore grander antiviral responses and antibody responses. And it pushes instead a pro-inflammatory response. And this
so the alarm system gets shut down? Is that basically what you're saying?
It gets suppressed and altered. What we know is that it has really big system-wide effects. So it alters, it's significant enough that it can alter lymph node function. It can slow wound healing. There's been some really, really depressing literature on intimate partner violence and how slowly it takes for wounds to heal under perceived and measured perceived stress that's associated with that.
Can I ask what, is that because it takes resources to heal wounds and then those resources are reallocated under stress, or what causes?
So there's a couple of different models for how this works. A lot of it is the one that's best understood is through the sympathetic nervous system, which leads to, so under emotional stress, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland communicate with each other, and then to the adrenal glands, which receive a variety, of chemicals via beta-adrenergic receptors, and that leads to the production of proteins that alter immune cell behavior. And what they do generally is that they push pro-inflammatory programs at the cost of any other kind of immune cell program. So those and pro-inflammatory cytokines, so those proteins that are being produced, they have lots and lots of different roles neurologically. And so it's possible that they're associated generally with the fight or flight response, and that's why that's necessary. But what they do more grandly over the long term is that they contribute to a lot of the comorbidities that we would associate with COVID-19 in the first place. So it's not just what's happening under chronic stress all the time because type 1 interferon responses get shut down. It's that you have this pro-inflammatory program that's open all the time, and it's also contributing to these comorbidities. And the top 3 comorbidities, all of which are associated with pro-inflammatory, like persistent pro-inflammatory milieu for COVID-19, are hypertension, obesity, and metabolic disorders like type 2 diabetes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Jessica, this is so fascinating. I can't wait for us to have you back so we could go into some more depth about many of these issues. So many levels of zombies upon zombies.
Many zombies all the way down.
It's zombies all the way down. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just before I go, I just want to say, I want to emphasize that this is not inevitable. There have been experiments with a number of animals where if you remove the stresses, no matter how chronic they are, these programs flip around. So in the case, just to make you feel a little bit better, if you can remove, say, systemic racism and discriminatory and segregationist practices, then, if you can make things more fair, this doesn't have to happen.
Oh, so, well, I mean, that is hopeful. That is nice. I think that is a decent transition to our next guest, who's going to be talking about the economy, which is another thing that we're hoping can sort of rebound. So we've got our apocalypse economics correspondent, Roger White. Hello,
Thanks,
Roger. Sure.
Hey.
How's it going?
Hey, hanging in, man. How about you?
Oh, same. So thanks for joining us today.
Certainly.
So do you want to tell us about what we can expect from the economy in the coming months and years?
Certainly, yeah. So I've been sufficiently scared by Dave and Esma and Jessica, so I'm gonna try to pitch the upside of what can an apocalyptic event do to actually spur economic growth, right? And we actually have a lot of really neat research in economic history, kind of going back and looking at what's happened over the last hundreds of years, what's happened in the last 1,000 years, and get some pretty neat insight. And some of my favorite work in that vein looks at the Black Plague in England in the 1300s. So before then, the standard economic model in most of Western Europe was this kind of manor agriculture. You have these landed lords and a bunch of serfs work for them, who are maybe one step above just abject chattel slavery, right? They're bound to the land, they can be bought and sold. It's really a type of very severe indentured debt servitude. So this is life for 95% of Western Europe 700 years ago, right? Then in the middle of the 1300s, the Black Plague just washes over the continent, right? What happens, over the next few decades? Something like 30 to 50% of the population just disappears, right? There's this, if we're not going to call that an apocalypse, I don't know what we're saving the word for, right?
Yeah.
But the thing about apocalypses, whether they're caused by zombies or the Black Plague or COVID-19, is that these apocalypses, tend to burn through people, but they don't eat capital, right? They don't eat hard assets. They don't eat means of production, right? Mm-hmm. So, if we, underwent some kind of zombie apocalypse, again, a bunch of people would disappear, but we would still have just as many gold mines, right? We'd still have just as many oil wells. We'd still have just as many farms, right? And so, Britain in the 1300s was mostly agricultural. So what happened is you've got, again, these serfs that are just about almost, enslaved individuals who are working these farms. Then all of a sudden, over the course of a few decades, half of them disappear, right? Well, the number of farms didn't disappear, right? So all of a sudden, there's this huge labor shortage. And in that kind of balance that, this equilibrium that labor and capital has to strike for an economy to function, all of a sudden, labor has a lot more negotiating power, right? Because again, capital hadn't shrunk. There's still just as many farms, but there's a lot fewer laborers to work these farms. And so what actually ends up happening over the next few decades is this, manor agriculture system, serfdom largely disappears in Western Europe, particularly in England, because these serfs had a lot more negotiating power, right? The lord who owns the farm, down the street has offered me, freedom, right? Or has offered me better wages, or has offered me, a better sharecropping arrangement. All of a sudden, these landowners had to start competing for labor, which really shifted the balance of power in that economy, right? So then what happens? Okay, well, these laborers have higher incomes, right? So they start, buying and consuming more things we think about as consumer goods, right? And so then all of a sudden, this increases demand for small-time manufacturing in England, right? More people have money. The working class has more money. They've got more disposable income. They're spending that income, and so production across the economy in these new sectors starts to increase, right? You see more shops open. You see more small-scale factories begin, right? Okay, so then what happens? Well, the cost of labor is higher in these places that have undergone these apocalypses. The people that are remaining have more wealth on a per capita basis. They're spending more on a per capita basis. That's boosting the economy overall, but it's also increasing the incentives for these people who maybe own these factories to try to lower costs, right? A lot of people want to buy these goods I'm manufacturing. And so, this is going on at a growing, progressively larger scale. And so then all of a sudden, in England, a couple hundred years later, right, you end up with, a little bit larger of kind of a low-level manufacturing industry, going on. And then, these guys actually start to make some breakthroughs. They have the most incentives because they're in a country where more of the working class has more disposable income to make these big industrial leaps, right? And so in England, you see what happens, in the middle part of the 1700s is, for a couple other kind of structural reasons, right? They had great access to a lot of coal reserves. They had a lot of quickly running water, so they could use a lot of water power. But you see the Industrial Revolution kick off, right? And it's all driven by the fact that 600 years ago, right, this apocalyptic plague burned through and killed half the population of the British Isles, which left just more money and more bargaining power in the hands of laborers, right? And we see this play over different types of pandemics, right? There's been some really neat work that's shown that the AIDS epidemic has actually really helped the very poor survivors in families that have been on the bleeding edge of AIDS in Southern Africa, right? The survivors tend to climb up the socioeconomic ladder a little bit because there's just more wealth left for the people that remain. If you look at the states that grew the quickest in the middle part of the 1900s, right? It was those states that got hit hardest by the Spanish flu. There's more wealth left over for the people that remain. Labor has a little bit more of an upper hand when they're negotiating with capital. The working class rises, and that rising tide lifts all boats.
So, Roger, is there a sort of paradox here where sometimes the worse a pandemic or apocalypse is, at least in the long term, the better the economy is? And what does that then mean for when you have a very slow burn kind of pandemic?
Definitely, yeah. So your intuition is exactly right, Athena. Right? I think the title of one of those papers looking at how AIDS has actually boosted the socioeconomic status of Africans that have survived the pandemic in Southern Africa. I think it's called "The Gift of Death." Right? Is the first little subpart of the title. So yeah, no, you're exactly right. What does that mean if we have a slow burn pandemic? That's what I think everybody's wrestling with now. Right, we're in the middle of this COVID pandemic, and it's shut down a lot of things. Thankfully, it hasn't been nearly as dangerous, from a mortality perspective as the Black Death was in 14th century England. But that's something, obviously we're still wrestling with. Luckily, COVID-19 hasn't taken a huge chunk of labor, like some of these other apocalyptic events have.
So Alana's got this comment here, which is kind of interesting. She mentions the tech billionaires have benefited from this pandemic because we've changed our behaviors to almost fully online. It does seem like so far, I keep hearing this story that this pandemic has sort of led to the rich getting richer. And so how does that mesh with sort of what you're saying? How is this going to play out the same way as the Black Death, or is this going to play out more like the way Alana sees it having played out up till now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, to be really clear, Alana's got a great point, and we've seen a lot of these tech billionaires that have a hand in the e-commerce economy do really well over the last few months. And specifically to answer your question, Dave, I really hope this doesn't play out like the Black Death, right? Where 50% of us die over the ensuing decades of this COVID-19. But what really pushes those mechanics, and what pushes those mechanics, from the Spanish flu, and what pushes those mechanics with AIDS in Southern Africa, is that really high mortality rate, right? That's kind of what shifts that balance of power between labor and capital. We haven't seen that, right? Thankfully, thank God we haven't seen that with COVID-19. So it's still up in the air. It's going to take a smarter economist than I am to tell you exactly how COVID-19 is going to affect the socioeconomic structure of how business and legal rights kind of come together and combine in the coming decades. But it's definitely a different twist, right? This is going to be something that economic historians 100 years from now and 1,000 years from now will be able to write about. And I'm sure Alana's point will be a headline that we're trying to explore.
Actually, and Carlo's, we're about to bring Carlo on in a second, but he has this comment: are the essential workers getting better paid and valued now? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if you know the answer to that. But even the idea of them now being called essential workers does seem like that's moving towards what you're saying of maybe they have a little more bargaining power. And maybe they could say, listen, what, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Right. And we definitely see that, in some fields, if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, if you're a physician's assistant, right, or a medical assistant, right, your labor has become incredibly valuable in this pandemic, right? And we're so glad you're out there, and we're so glad you're working hard. Maybe that's a good example, right? Of this pandemic has kind of changed the balance of power there, and those people are certainly able to command higher wages and have a lot more freedom in their work. The kind of essential workers that we think of stocking, shelves in pharmacies and grocery stores, that's maybe tougher, right? To say that those guys are real winners here. Maybe they're getting more hours, and maybe it's easier to get those jobs. But for the most part, this pandemic has really just hammered the left side of the distribution in the economy, right? Workers like me, workers like you, workers like Athena, who can, largely transition online, and there's not, a huge shock to the way we earn our, white collar dollars. We haven't been terribly affected, right? So I have a hard time thinking that this pandemic has really been beneficial to the guy that, stocks on shelves at Safeway, but I think
go ahead. I think it fits into what Jessica was saying too, where it's like, the people who are out there stocking shelves, they're being hit by the stress, they're being exposed to the disease. It's just this really tough.
Liz points out here, she has a comment that she really wants to believe this about essential workers, that they're getting more collective bargaining power, but what she's seen in terms of striking with workers in big tech companies and also among graduate students isn't giving her that much hope for collective bargaining powers.
I mean,
to be clear, what gave serfs collective bargaining power in the 1300s was just massive, catastrophic mortality rates, right? I completely agree, right? The benefit, if anything, of this pandemic relative to some of those, historical pandemics is that overall mortality rate has been much lower than we've seen with something like the plague.
But I think it's also sort of really expedited the rise of the machines, though, which I think might be part of why it's harder on the working class. Things are moving to Zoom and Amazon and things like that. So,
thank you, Roger.
It's been fun. I appreciate the invite, guys.
Very insightful analysis for us all. So one of the other aspects of the zombie apocalypse that it's important to consider is our strategy for how we want to deal with it. And one option is finding a way to control it and contain it. So here to talk about containment and control strategies, we have evolutionary biologist Carlo Maley. Welcome, Carlo. Now, Carlo, you're rather famous for pointing out that eradication is not always an option when it comes to fighting threats to our health, zombies included. Can you tell us a little bit about why eradication doesn't always work and what that means for how we should approach the zombie apocalypse?
Sure. Many sources of threats to our health, like cancer or infectious disease and zombies, are very diverse populations. There's billions of, maybe trillions of virus particles or bacteria, cancer cells. And so what we found is that when we just try to mow them down with our guns or our drugs, we kill a lot of them, but we leave behind the ones that are resistant to our techniques of killing them. And I think, to echo what Esma was saying, that we're not good at understanding these exponential processes. We seem to be in the early stages of this zombie outbreak, but I think we can project ahead that it's going to get out of control. And actually, eradication of zombies is hopeless. And so we need to start thinking about how we're going to deal with that fact. That if we just try to mow them down with machine guns and maybe chemical weapons, we're just going to select for zombies that are good at avoiding machine guns and chemical weapons. And so what we really need is a new class of essential workers, which I think of as zombie herders, that they would need to be paid well because they're going to have to sort of shape the kind of epidemic that we're having. And what we should be thinking about is, what are the selective pressures we want to put on this zombie population to select for the kinds of zombies we can live with, right? So if you think about cancer as sort of an analogous situation, what we do with cancer is we apply a drug that tries to kill all proliferating cells, and what we select for is resistance to our drugs, and that's really not what we want. So there's new ideas in cancer control, which can actually come from pest control, which look at how do we select for pests or cancer cells that we can live with but not die from. So I think we need to think about what kinds of zombies we want to have in our society, and that are going to be less lethal and less damaging to our society and to our economy. And then how do we select for those traits?
That makes a lot of sense, Carlo. Are there examples from infectious disease and cancer that we can sort of look to, or agriculture for how we might do this?
Well, yeah. So in the work of Andrew Reed in malaria shows that if you go in with high dose anti-malarial drugs, you essentially get your quickest way of selecting for resistance, and actually backing off on those drugs is an effective way of reducing the spread of resistance. In cancer and in pest management, what we find is that the pests that are sensitive to the pesticides can generally outcompete the pests that are resistant to the pesticides. And so they've found that they actually want to keep some sensitive pests around, which is again about sort of keeping around the things you want and putting pressure against the things you don't want. So if you keep around sensitive pests by not spraying all of the fields, they can outcompete the resistant pests and keep the resistant pests under control. And we're doing the same thing in cancer now. So
this is really an argument for essentially cultivating zombies that are not really that good at avoiding our attempts to kind of keep them under control.
Yeah, we're cultivating the ones that are not going to be so dangerous to us, maybe that have dull teeth that can't really get into our flesh, if that's their mode of transmission. If we could bias them more towards sexual transmission of disease rather than the morbid tearing of flesh, then most sexually transmitted disease are not very pathogenic. They're not very as harmful, and they lay low because people don't want to have sex with people that look like they have gaping wounds or smell bad or are having trouble communicating. So I think these are the kinds of things we should think about. Or if there's more vegetarian zombies that we can select for, we could feed them more vegetables, provide them with an advantage, whereas the meat-eating zombies would be at a disadvantage in that kind of environment.
I have one more question, sort of relating this back to what we've talked about throughout the day and what we were just talking about to Roger. When we think about these sort of techno zombies that we've been discussing throughout the day, are there ways that we could possibly use these same strategies with them? Rather than sort of trying to eradicate, because we've been talking, you just got to go completely offline or whatever. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it comes back essentially to incentives, and I sometimes think of incentives as carrots and sticks, right? You want to give carrots to the things that are good and sticks to the things that are bad. And so if there's the right incentives for interacting with technology in ways that don't zombify us so much, then we bias the development of technology towards those things that are hopefully more in line with our values. And if we disincentivize the things that are encouraging the control of our behavior against our values, then we can sort of hopefully push ourselves into a more healthy coevolution with our technology.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that idea, like this idea of sort of coexisting with our zombies and coexisting with.
Yeah, we want to live with and not die from them.
Yeah. So
Thank you,
maybe
Carlo. That's great. And speaking of surviving, in a situation where we just have to deal with zombies, we have our survival correspondent, Dr. Cam Carlson, here with us. Cam, what is your advice for those of us who want to survive the zombie apocalypse without being zombified ourselves? Do you think peaceful coexistence is an option?
Yeah, well, you're looking at number one right here.
What do you got there?
Well, from my girl Addison Shafley, she wanted me to do quarantinis. So that's what I'm doing. Basically, it's just gin, vodka, and emergency. You pour it in a glass, and you start your day off right.
The health benefits.
Sorry, thought I heard something. Anyway, moving on. Sorry, guys. Surviving the apocalypse. Well, first thing is, I'd say that everybody talks about going to, different places in the woods or oh, what's your plan? Well, I'm going to get out of Dodge. I'm going to go to the woods. I'm going to survive. Yeah, well, okay, that's fine and everything. But do you have a plan? Can you realistically go to where you think? Can you survive in the woods? Can you survive? Like, do you have the basic skills? Probably not. It sounds like a really good idea, but in all actuality, it's not. My first suggestion is stay where you are. As everybody was talking about, you're going to see these massive amounts of infections, these exponential infection rates. And in the zombie apocalypse, you're talking about things that bite, and we're not just worried about the zombies. You got to be worried about the militias. You got to be worried about the people. You got to be worried about the people from Terminus and The Walking Dead. Stay where you are. Make sure you know what's going on. Listen to the radio until it goes down. And then from there, execute your plan. That is, if you have a plan.
Now, let me just jump in because Carlo was talking about how we don't necessarily want to just go out guns blazing and try to kill zombies. What's your perspective on that? Do you think we should kind of get in there and just try to kill as many zombies as possible, or do you recommend a different approach?
Well, remember, your first responsibility is yourself and your family. The answer to that question is no, unless you have to engage in an activity that involves something along the lines of a shotgun or anything that makes noise, even a 22. The answer is no, because that's going to endanger yourself. It's going to endanger other people because that noise is going to bring zombies in. So yeah, that's easy. No, don't engage. Don't kill mass zombies because unless that's your bag, go for it. But I don't recommend it. I recommend keeping low, keeping out of sight, and just going from there, figuring it out. Hunkering down or executing a plan that you've already talked about.
Cam, I'm going to bring Carlo back in here too. One thing that I think is important to talk about is if you're going to hunker down, how long do you need to hunker down before the zombies would actually die out from lack of resources? Carlo, with your background in evolution and ecology, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I want to be clear about this, that a lot of our stories about zombies are Walking Dead, that they're actually dead, but we have no actual real evidence of that thing being any way possible. So the realistic thing we're looking at is live organisms that have to eat and have to maintain their bodily functions and can't walk around with big gaping holes. So they are going to run out of food if they can't find it for themselves or can't hunt it. There's no reason to think that they wouldn't be eating each other. although that's not common in our stories, if they're cannibalistic, they should be looking to each other as well. So I think there's a good reason to think that, assuming they don't have the cognitive capacities to really generate their own food, grow their own food, or do much scavenging, it shouldn't be very long before the population of zombies should be crashing. And I agree with Dr. Carlson that we should be hunkering down and waiting for them to either starve to death, die of thirst, die of their wounds, or eat each other.
Thank you. And so, Dr. Carlson, any tips for us if we are hunkering down that we should keep in mind? We've just got a couple minutes or a couple seconds really left.
Yeah. During this time frame, while you're hunkering down, read. Read as much as you can. Read about how to survive, because if you have to move from your place of comfort in a bad situation to get out, you've got to understand where to get water, how to get it, how to get food, how to make a shelter, how to build a fire. Read all you can. Have a plan that includes your family, your pets, how you're going to survive. And I know we're going to be talking about that in the Go Bag challenge later on, but take what you need to survive for a long period of time. Don't try and take, all the essentials that you think you need to survive. So read all you can, make sure you're in the know, and learn basic survival skills and first aid. That's really, and also the biggest thing that I can suggest is when you leave and you're in an apocalypse, make sure you have the will to survive. If you don't have the will, you're not going to survive. If you die, it's your fault. You can survive. You just have to make it a priority. That's what I have to say about that.
Thanks, Cam. That's great advice. So make sure that your survival is a top priority for yourself, and presumably the survival of your loved ones as well. Keep that front and center. And just a reminder, Cam is going to be on Go Bag Challenge. He's one of our Go Bag Challenge judges. So you can find him tomorrow afternoon on Go Bag Challenge. And so thank you, Cam. Thank you, Carlo, Jessica, Roger, Esma, David, all of our amazing guests today. And thank you to all of you for joining us for the evening edition of Undead Live. We will be back at 7 for Late Night Brains with our featured speakers and our musical guest, Baba Brinkman. And don't forget, share those brains in the zombie apocalypse. We'll help keep you safe.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you. Makes me act the way I